Hello and welcome to the Thursday night Scotland Rugby News podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Egg-Shaped, and the man from Scotland Rugby News who has been busy, the one and the only Mr. Gavin Harper. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Busy as ever, as you say, but all good. So, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Plenty to write about, but before we get there, quick word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so you can start your search straight after this podcast finishes. Interesting times, lots going on. Under-20s World Cup is up and running. Scotland's tour played the Maori, got Fiji coming up. British Lions is there. Women are preparing for the World Cup, so there's plenty going on. Where do we start? We start Scotland. Let's start Scotland.
Let's start Scotland.
Maori, good to win. An interesting selection that we were chatting last week before a team was announced, and I think the message I sent to you was an infinite number of monkeys could have had infinite number of typewriters and would never, ever, ever have come up with that team sheet if they had infinity to type. No way could I have picked that.
No, I think that's fair, but I think what he showed was, I'm not surprised he's made loads of changes this week. It was probably the game to give Finn Richardson, Alex Masabaka a go, and I actually thought there was plenty in it for Gregor to sort of take away. I thought Ollie Smith was good. Harry Patterson looked pretty sharp. Stafford did all right at 12. I think Adam Hastings and George Horn played well. I think I said on Twitter or X, what we're calling it. I'm surprised neither of them are starting this weekend. But again, now this is another opportunity to say, well, over at you, Fergus Burke, how many have put that 10 jersey on in the 11 years since Finn made his debut in a summer tour, and probably nobody really has worn it with the same authority as Finn. So, look, it's a first chance for Fergus from the start. But yeah, I thought the most pleasing part about the Maori game, to be honest, that happened after the 80 minutes when they sort of, it felt like that inevitability of penalty, Maori kick to the corner, they're going to score here. Cam Henderson goes to the bin, and it was sort of backs to the wall stuff. You think, are they going to hold out? Is the experience there to manage this? And then between them, Dobie and Burke blast through a ruck, win the ball back, and there you go. So actually, I thought that was good. I thought the kicking game was good. As I say, I thought there was a few individuals. George Turner, I thought, was busy off the bench. As I say, Ollie Smith, I thought was good. So, I think there was enough in it. And look, I think I said to you as well, I'd far rather Scotland were winning non-cap games like that than we were handing out caps and beating Canada and Chile by 60 and 70 points. Like, I just think you get nothing out of that. So, definitely a worthwhile exercise. And it also means you're not got another massive step up from a Canada, to them playing somebody like Fiji, who looked pretty decent against Australia, and they were unlucky not to win that.
Yeah, amen, brother. The fact that it was a non-cap, when you think back to some of the retrospective caps that are now being awarded for reasonably similar games, but there's another one to add to the list of alternative podcasts. But having a team play like that and get a win, find a way to win in difficult circumstance against a good class, I was really, really chuffed with that. This team that's been picked for Fiji, and in fact, let's start with Fiji. That result, that Australia-Fiji result, is making everybody go, right, hang on, what does that mean for Alliance? What does that mean for Scotland? What does it mean for Australia, Fiji? Can Fiji back it up? They will be absolutely flying for this, because they'll be looking at the Scotland game thinking, right, it's not just their World Cup rankings.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they'll be smarting from not being able to hold on against Australia, and they will fancy their chances at a tier one nation at home. You know, chatting to a couple of folk this week, how often that doesn't happen often for Fiji.
Mm.
You know, the Scottish guys have talked a lot about the welcome they've got, and I think the message has been sort of, we're under no illusions here as to how difficult this is going to be. But like, you look at some of the names on paper, everybody knows Bill, everybody knows Bill Mata, but like that backline is frightening. You know, Wainicolo on the wing plays for Toulon and has been electric. Made a ridiculous break in the Australia game. Tuisova, like, I would have loved to have seen Tuisova head to head with Sione, but like Tom Jordan should better have warm shoulders. Ravuvu on the wing is at Bristol with Bill and has lit up the Premiership at times. Riasi scored against Australia and plays in the top 14, you know, and then like that stuff, I think we still always say, yeah, but you know, up front, but like Ronnie Maui, Canaveri the hooker.
Well, you're bringing on Matavesi, so it's not
Yeah.
even that. It's not that Fiji still have those stereotypes, like you're saying. Oh, up front, we'll get them up front. But now you're looking at not just up front, but they've got depth off the bench.
Yeah, exactly. And like Albert Tuisue, Matavesi, as you say, Botitu, and that, like it's a serious team. And I think, like I've said before, I think this is the one that I'm most worried about of these three games. That
if we were playing them at Murrayfield, I would be less worried. But we're also not catching them first game up. They've had time. They've had a game together to analyse. Scotland, this is our first game.
It's almost, if you remember, we played them and put 50 points on them at Murrayfield in November. I think Gregor said this morning. It was
outside the window.
Yeah, but it's now almost roles reversed, because if you like, we're outside the window because we've 10 players missing through Lions or other injuries and rest. And, so now you're saying, well, it's not entirely second choice, but in some positions it is, against Fiji, who are pretty well loaded with all their big guns. So now, look, I think it'd be really tough, and it honestly wouldn't surprise me if Fiji win. I think
it's a good Scotland side, though. I know, and we spoke about this when the squads were named. You take out 10 players, but to field a forward pack like that's obviously missing our first choice 1 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, and 4, but Scotty Cummings wasn't there in the Six Nations. But you look at that forward pack, and you've got a British Lion in there, but you've got a back row of Richie, Darge, and Fagerson, who are going to be key if Scotland are going to win these next 2 weeks, because that's probably not far away from our first choice back row. It would be, we could argue that one, but that's a very strong back row. And then you look at that back line, Dobie's not far away from Ben White. Fergus Burke is potentially going to come out of this tour behind Finn as Scotland number 2. Cam Redpath's won everything he's competed in this year. Tom Jordan, we all thought and hoped is going to end the summer as a Lion. Darcy the same. Kyle Rose first choice. Kyle Staines for... That's a strong Scotland squad. And you still, like you saying, Horn and Hastings could have and should have started. They're on the bench to come on. Bayliss, who's your favourite. George Turner, who you name checked. So there's depth there as well. I think it's going to be an absolute belter.
Yeah, I think that's the one part of it that I'm looking forward to, is that I think it'll be it's all the makings of a proper good game. And but I think, just to go back to the Maori game a wee bit, there was still that maddening Scottish 10-15 minutes where they had the game virtually sewn up, and then all of a sudden back come the Maori, and became pretty interesting. I think that for me is still a massive worry. I think, from the World Cup, really, Scotland have never shaken those massive lapses. And it's not that, yes, teams drop off. What worries me is that other teams don't concede as many points during the drop-off period as Scotland tend to do. So I think one of the things over the next fortnight I would like to see is if there is almost a lull in the performance, which you could maybe forgive because of the weather and other teams do get momentum. But I think Scotland need to be better at not conceding as many points during that period.
I'm going to agree to disagree, because that squad that played against the Maori isn't the Scotland squad that we've had.
No,
I get what you mean, and it almost feels. I think maybe your point is it's almost a cultural thing. It seems to be affecting everybody, and that's one of those things when you're. It's a bit like the average. You need everybody to be at least an 8 out of 10 to beat the best teams, but then you need 11 of your 15 to actually be 9 and 10 out of 10. Like your poorest player has to be putting in still a very, very good shift. I've got up the squad. Scotland, it looks like, are playing 3 front row groups. So Macbeth, Harrison and Richardson played against the Maori. Turner, Hepburn and Hurd, or maybe I've got that wrong, have I? Turner, Hepburn and Hurd are coming off the bench.
Yep.
Turner, Hepburn and Hurd are coming off the bench against Fiji.
Yep.
So they're training as a 3.
Yeah.
Suz, Ashe and Miller-Mills didn't play against Maori, are starting against Fiji, are working as a 3 with George, Alec Hepburn and Will Hurd to come on. So I'm kind of interested by that Suz, Ashe and Elliot Miller-Mills should be going, right, hang on, does this mean we're behind, well, Ashe potentially first choice, but we're behind Pierre and Xander in the pecking order, so let's put in a really good shift here.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is it maybe gives a wee bit of an indication as to Gregor looking at combinations for these games, obviously, but moving forward, maybe it's like we talked about South Africa before and the way they deploy. By the way, did you see when the bomb squad came on? They set fireworks. I mean, that's a step too far for even me.
I've had a rant about that on my own channels today.
Yes, I did have a wee read of that.
I got a row off my wife this week for my new series on happiness egg shaped, moaning about stuff. She said that's not really on brand. So, but yes, the bomb squad it went supersonic, fireworks and lights flashing and all sorts.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure we'll be setting fireworks off at Murrayfield for making subs.
It wouldn't surprise me if Razzie was the one pressing the button to set them off.
No, do you know what? You might be right. He seems to do just about every other job. But no, the point I was making there is I think for a long time he's had a 3, particularly in the front row, as starters, and then 3 coming off the bench as kind of set roles. So I'm not sure if Gregor's looking at it from that point of view, but it maybe is with one eye on, does Finn Richardson and Macbeth maybe get a chance against Samoa? And you rotate them as a 3 rather than kind of seem, not randomly, but just kind of horses for courses.
Yeah, who knows? The darts, who knows? That back line, because I'm bored of talking about front row, we've spoken about them for far too long. That back line, that back 3 of Kyle Rowe, Darcy Graham, Kyle Steyn, that's strong with experience now, international experience. Yep. It's talking combinations. I'm not sure if Cam Redpath and Tom Jordan will have played together. I'm doubting that. But that's a really exciting 12 or 13. My worry is if Tuisova comes to say hello, that one of them might end up not able to say hello. And I know nothing about Fergus Burke, and Dobie I think's class, and I'm totally biased in that. That's a really exciting backline that is going to have to show itself defensively against Fiji, because who knows what's coming. But I really hope they get ball.
Yeah, me too. I think one of the first things to say is when Gregor spoke this morning, he talked up both Jamie and Fergus for not so much what they do with the ball, but actually their defensive sort of ability. So clearly, I think we can say that Fergus Burke's been picked because he's probably a better tackler than Adam Hastings, and with the idea that Tuisova and Bill Matt are coming down that channel, you probably want somebody who's a reasonable defender in their road. So look, I think that's one part of why Burke's in the team. I think the other part, which loads of folk, Scottish Rugby before the team left organised a kind of media day at the team hotel where they basically put a whole load of players up to speak, and 2 or 3 of them referenced Fergus Burke talking about playing in Fiji for the Crusaders and the atmosphere. So I think there's not many of the Scotland squad have been there before. I think the fact he has been there, he'll know what it's like. He's probably a wee bit more used to the conditions and how to manage them and stuff. I think that's probably part of it. And then the back three, which I think is interesting, is Gregor was very, very complimentary of Kyle Rowe. Said he thinks he's one of the best finishers in the game, which I think is very high praise. And when you consider that, I think most of us would have Duhan, Darcy, Blair sort of nailed on as your first choice, with Kyle Stain probably next in line. If you think then Kyle Rowe's maybe the next guy after that, you're potentially saying he's fifth choice. I think that's that shows the depth that's there. And yeah, the midfield, I'm really interested to see Cam Redpath at 13. He's never played there for Scotland, but I just think that wee bit further out might suit him. I'm not sure he's got the physicality to play 12 at international level, particularly against somebody like Tuisova. But at 13, I think, get his hands on the ball and let's see what he can do.
I think it's a really exciting backline. I do worry about that forward pack. Talking about folk that haven't been there before. I think Gilco was there when Bill McLaren was still commentating. But that forward pack, especially the locks, neither of them are playing in the back row.
No.
So Marshall played last week against the Maori. He's in there. I think Gilco and Marshall will enjoy driven lineouts and let's take it to them. Let's get right in amongst this. And Fergus Pringle will, he'll be relishing the opportunity for a line out against Fiji. I think. I wonder. I'm really interested to see how Scotland play against Fiji, because we all know it could get loose. Although the game has changed, it's not quite the Fiji it used to be. There will still be box kicks, let's face it. But that forward pack and that back line, to me, look like quite different beasts.
Yeah, I think Gregor said last week how to win that sort of kick battle was one of the things that Scotland had kind of honed in on for this tour. So I think there'll be plenty of ball in the air, to be honest. And I think Scotland will want the game to be as structured and as sort of boringly rigid as they possibly can. And, it was, I don't know if you saw this, there was an interview with Finn after I'm kind of digressing here a wee bit, but after the Lions game yesterday, and he talked about having that ability to be Finn, essentially, go off the cuff, but do it all within the structure. And I think that's the thing. Like, nobody's saying to Fergus Butt, right, let's run everything from our own 22. Now, Fiji might fancy that, and we've seen that from them before. That's kind of their DNA. I think where Scotland will look to probably have a bit of an edge is that most of this squad has been around the Six Nations squad, was involved in the autumn, so they know that structure. And so, yeah, I think Scotland will keep it pretty tight.
Yeah, I think so, and I'm chuffed for Suz. I really hope he has a big game. I hope he is dominant at scrum time. I hope he gets lots of hands on ball. He'll relish the ball at the jumper, driven line out nonsense as well. I hope Suz has an absolute belter, because he's one that deserves not necessarily luck, but he deserves a shot and he deserves something to run for him. So I'm really looking forward to that. And with George Turner, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think just to flag this point, Josh saying here about TJ at 10, I think the answer to that is that I think he thinks Fergus Burke is as good a defender, if not maybe better than Tom Jordan.
I'd also say, Josh, that Stafford as a 13, I think we're probably if it has to. I'm not sure you're picking Stafford at 13. You're picking him at 12 or on the bench, and if he has to come on and play at 13, you will. I also don't think Gregor is picking I know you said Fergus Burke defensively and Jamie Dobie, but they still have it all going on in attack. Gregor's never going to pick a team to defend.
No, totally. I think, it's an interesting point that you, as a former 10, how often were you picked and somebody singled out your defensive abilities?
That would have been every week.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. It's an interesting thing to reference as a point of difference for a 10 was my point, I think.
And that's a thing. Like Johnny Wilkinson ruined it for everybody because he started being a defensive 10. So we've got Johnny Wilkinson to blame.
Do you know what I'm really irked by over the last 6 months? And I think this is one of these, because he now plays in the Premiership, maybe. See this idea that 2 years ago, when Finn was playing in France, he couldn't tackle, and now he's playing for the Lions and he's playing for Bath, and it's you hear all these pundits on TV. Finn Russell's defensively now exceptional. I think he's been that for a long time.
But there's a lot of players that are easy to point fingers at, and Finn is one of them. But he was only at Glasgow. He was at Racing, but what did they do? He's at Bath, but they've got it's now those that, and when we are totally biased, but a lot of the people who were looking from the outside in now have no more excuses. Finn Russell is the real deal, total package. He's got the gold and silver to prove it. He's got the Lions now believing in him. And it should have been 4 years ago. We all believe. So I think you're right. And those kind of things do annoy me. It's a bit like Darcy. He's small. Well, he is. But so was Shane Williams.
Exactly. So was Vincent Clerc, but France gave him, however many opportunities.
The laddie Colby's not the biggest either.
No, exactly. It's so short-sighted, and it's actually really lazy to say.
It's about that. You've just taken the words right out of my mouth. It's lazy. It's the easy thing. It's like somebody commented on Finn's goal kicking. Now I would agree with that because not that long ago he was an 80-something% or 70. I can't remember what it was, but I remember seeing it and thinking, and that's one of those things that probably they were able to rule him out of the Lions as a goal kicker because there were others who were a higher percentage. And look at Neil Jenkins was a Lions test fullback. That baffled everybody, but he had to, and he played well. That's being lazy from me as well. But he was right. How do we get the best goal kicker in the team?
Yeah.
And he's a very good player as well. But he was there for goal kicking. So I think you're right. And Finn, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Just one more before we finish on
Josh's
Scotland.
ball, oh, gee whiz. Neil Smith, what a boy. What a
There you
boy.
go. I thought you would enjoy that. So there you go. Right, we'll move on and talk a bit about things in Australia.
Right, I'm going to start with this. Right, I've not told you this, but I'm going to start with this. I'm struggling to get excited.
Me too.
The last two games, I was on the weekend. I eventually found somewhere that we put the Lions on. I walked in, the young guy. I said, "Any chance of putting the British Lions on?" And he went, "What's that?" I nearly thought him in the eye. Anyway, we got his manager, and she came back and she put it on. And I was sitting with some Aussies, and we ended up just blethering for quite a long time because the game just didn't get us buzzing. And then yesterday was kind of the same.
Yeah. Do you know, somebody pointed out, I can't remember where I read it, but somebody pointed out, when was the last time, or has there been a time, apart from Dublin, you heard the sort of Lions chant, or like, remember in Australia 8 years ago, New Zealand, sorry, there was the Maro Itoje song. Like, it's all felt so flat, and I think a bit of that has rubbed off on the performances. I think it's a sort of two-way street. I think the performances have been flat, so the crowds have been flat. But look, yeah, I've not been like, I love the Lions, but I've not been overly enthused by it. I think this weekend, look, at one stage it sounded like we were going to get, you know, every man and their dog that was available to play in this invitational team. I think at one stage there was chat that Aaron Smith and Will Genia would be the scrum halves, and Mo'unga was going to play 10. And like, it's clearly not that. But what it is a team that a week out from the first test could do a fair bit of damage. You know, when you look at Corey Mbete, Laumape, Havili, AJ Lam, the back row is Frizzell, Pete Samu, and Hoskins Satutu, like Salakai Aloto in the second row. Like, it's pretty route one. And I just wonder, I know that folk had talked about the Brumbies game being like the biggest challenge. I actually wonder if this game might be more of a challenge against international players, and if the team selected for the weekend rises to that, does that then put the likes of Sione and Hugh above Bundy and Gary Ringrose?
There's also my concern with a team like this. You can't analyse this team. A bit like I said the same thing when we were talking about Scotland playing the Maori. You can't analyse the Maori. Now, there's no way they could have analysed Scotland, but there are things that they have looked at and went, well, Scotland tend to do these kind of things, and Scotland tend to do these kind of things. Fiji are a game deep, having played Australia. Scotland will have been able to do analysis on Fiji. Fiji will have struggled to do analysis on Scotland, but there will be things that will be common no matter who's wearing the Scotland jersey.
Yeah.
This team, who knows what they're going to do? Like that back row, Frizzle, who I'm sure used to play for Gallifreydine when I was a lad. Frizzle, Pete Samu, and Hoskins Satutu. That is frightening. Like, that's proper scary. And then you've got players in that back line who, you know, Sean Stevenson is class.
Yeah.
Like that, and Aidan Ross has already played against the Lions, so he's maybe saying, right, here's what to expect, here's what to do. I think it's a really exciting game because that team have got nothing to lose. This is a one shot, lads. We're here for one game. Let's be the one everybody's talking about and pick ourselves up a contract in France or Japan. I think it's class. And the Lions team that they've picked, I've seen probably three sides to the reaction on social media. Folks saying that's a strong dirt tracker team. none of them will play in the test, to some going, wow, that looks like it could be close to a test team minus one or two, to then folk going like, how can you tell? And I'm in that third group. How can you tell? Because there's still another, I just think there's a chance for players in that team still.
There is a chance. I think I'm probably in another category that says this is an opportunity, but I think a lot of the test combinations played on Wednesday. I think.
Do you like cards on the table? Do you think 12 and 13 are Bundy and Ringrose?
I've just had this debate with someone else, and I'm not sure. They are the two positions. There's maybe one more, 6, that I think I can't make my mind up. I think they're linked, because I think depending on who you play in the back row might depend on who you've got in the midfield. And I also think there's part of me.
That's decent analysis for you, by the way.
Sorry, say again?
That's decent analysis for you. I like that the back row and centre combination will be linked. I like that.
Yeah, I just think that I think they'll go Chesham at 6. And I think that maybe actually goes in Sione's favour, because then, if you go Chesham, Conan, and you've got either Genge or Porter at loose head, and Dan Sheehan, you've got 4 proper ball carriers who'll get you over the gain line. I think that then takes the pressure off the 12 to be just sort of up and down. And I think you can pick Sione, even though he's maybe not been absolutely at his best, because he gives you more of a threat. I think we know Bundy's going route 1 most of the time. And when he has been that link player, it sort of hasn't worked.
Whereas, do you know what annoys me? The 12-13 thing is that they've been looked at as Scotland and Ireland. Why not play Bundy with Jones and Sione with Ringrose?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, the first one in the game in Dublin, when he put Bundy with Sione, just felt like the one of all the combinations that was never going to work.
I did like that. I'm just sad it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised it didn't work. I know we talked about it, but like, I would have said this before. I would have liked for Duhan and James Lowe to get an opportunity to play together. I think very quickly we've pigeonholed. Okay, so Duhan and James Lowe are going for one spot. Tommy Freeman and Matt Canson are going for the other wing spot. Blair's injury's obviously thrown a spanner in the works in the back three. I think fullback is now a worry. I think if Elliot Daly hadn't broken his arm, he'd be absolutely nailed on there. You look at who is nailed on now. Marrow's captain, Dan Sheehan, Finn's been the best player on tour, I think. Gibson Park at 9. But like even somebody like, I know Alex Mitchell's played every game, but if Ben White is an absolute stormer at the weekend, he at least makes that a conversation. Pierre could make it a conversation if he's a big game and is dominant set piece. But yeah, I think the other thing, I was listening to Sam Warburton say this, is the test series isn't one game. The first test team will inevitably not be the team that finishes. So it's important, I think, that somebody like Duhan, who looks like he might miss out, or Scott Cummings are still in good form, and play well on Saturday, to give the coaches that reminder that, okay, you might have your first test 23 kind of ironed out, but actually I am here to compete.
Yeah, I'm not sure Blair, that it feels like it would be a big deal for him to start at 15 in the first test now.
Yeah, I think
that
it would. Sorry, I just one other point on the centres. I think we talked at one stage during the Six Nations about having Gibson Park, Finn, Sione, Hugh, possibly Doohan, Darcy, and Blair, and we now, and that was a prospect at that time. I think there is a real prospect on a week on Saturday that we could be looking at Gibson Park with Finn, Bundy, Gary Ringrose, Matt Hansen, James Lowe, and Hugo Keenan.
Do you not think Freeman's getting on the ding-a-ling?
I think he might. I just think Matt Hansen's an Andy Farrell player. Like and I think for him, he's not a risk-taking coach, and for him, picking Finn will be enough of a risk that's why I'm swaying towards.
I'm not having that now. We're not calling Finn a risk now.
Not a risk, but it's a move away from that systemic way that he plays. So that's why I think he'll go with the Irish centres, particularly for the first test. And then you start to think, okay, well, is it the combinations? Does it help Hugo Keenan if he's got Matt Hansen and James Lowe because he won't have played that many games on the tour? Does putting Freeman in because he's in slightly better form maybe than Hansen, is it an unnecessary 50-50? I think that's where I'm going, and I think I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't be mad at that. I think but I would be harsh on Hugh. I think Hugh's been brilliant.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the thing with these. It's a bit like when we try and pick a Scotland team. You pick a team you think it should be, and you try and pick a team that Gregor's going to pick, and that's where we are with Alliance. It's like, right, what team does Andy Farrell pick? Because that's challenging, and it could be really Irish heavy. The forward pack, I've written 3 or 4 different packs, and there's certain players like Sheehan, Itoje. He's going to start Furlong, isn't he? At tight head. Genge, I think, you're starting loose head.
Yeah, again, like
back row. Chesham's a big lump of a boy. Pollock's a rock star, but Morgan is. I think Jack Morgan is some player.
To be honest, I would have taken Jamie Ritchie on the tour ahead of Morgan, but I've been totally disproved by that.
No, come on.
Yeah, I think during the Six Nations he wasn't the best player on the pitch when Wales were struggling, but I think he's been sensational, and it's that debate about how do you then get, is he the starter? Are you then leaving Van der Fleer and Curry out? Or do you go?
I think you're leaving Curry out. I don't think Curry's in the 23.
Yeah, I don't think he is. Which is, England fans will be disappointed. He'll be disappointed, but I think he's not shown enough. I think it then gives you the opportunity to go 6-2 on the bench, and you can get Van der Fleer, and I think Ben Earl is. I think Ben Earl's more the finished prospect than Henry Pollock is.
No, of course he is. Why is Jack Willis not there? Like, talking about players that have been left behind. Jack Willis. I saw quite a game. I really enjoyed it, and the depth that England have got is building and kind of frightening.
Yeah,
some of those players in that England team, I still think Spencer's class. I would have had him away as a number 9 for the Lions. Yeah. I think Will Muir, I mean, what a boy that is, and having had the time that he's had. I really like that England team and that performance. But you're looking at Willis thinking, how on earth is he? How's he been ignored?
Oh, are we talking England Tom Willis or Toulouse Jack Willis?
Oh, Jack Willis. Sorry. Oh, yeah, wrong one. Sorry. But that England team's still good. Like, why is he not there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made for, to be honest, for both of them. Because if you look at, that Lions squad, what does it lack? It lacks I know Caelan Doris would have been there, and Jack Conan's doing his bit, and he was good yesterday, but it lacks a big lump that can just take them over the gain line. I don't think, like, folk were talking about Falatau, but like that race is run. Jack Dempsey's not been fit for most of this year. Like, it's Tom Willis was the one that if you were going for an out and out number 8, get him in. But his brother, he's just, since like his brother's arguably the best 7 in Europe, and the Lions have said, nah, we'll just do without him, and no disrespect to Pollock, but we'll take this kid who's played 20 minutes for England. Like, surely playing in Champions Cup finals and top 14 finals over the last couple of seasons is more than 20 minutes against Wales. And I've not been fussed about Henry Pollock on this tour. To me it was a kind of hype pick.
It's continued. There's folk getting excited, and he's just a bairn. So he's had a lot of attention. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward more to this game. Do you know one of the other things that I struggle with, because of the state Australian rugby's been in, and because we're not consuming Super Rugby the way we used to when everybody was watching it. I couldn't tell you a Waratah for a Force, for a Brumby anymore, to a Red. Like, I don't know. We used to know them all because they were household names. They were flying, and we were all watching Super Rugby. So I'm really struggling with that. So this, throwing a team together, and they tried it in South Africa. I can't even remember what they called them. They've tried it various places. I think this thrown together team's really exciting and will make it a really interesting game that's going to get us a bit more excited going into Test 1.
Yeah, I hope so. And I also hope, and we know this from Lions tours gone by, we know that the week before the first test is when people start arriving en masse. And no, this game's in Adelaide, the first test's in Brisbane. But you just wonder, if you were looking at an extra game, you would maybe have thought, could we get to Adelaide for this one and then get to Brisbane for the first test? I hope there's more Lions fans. I hope the atmosphere's a wee bit better. I know All in the Game was saying it just there in a comment that I'll try and find it. Yeah, here we go. It's State of Origin Rugby League. So I know that's going to take up more interest. But let's hope the whole thing starts to get a bit of a motor on. Look, it's going to get a level of interest because Owen Farrell's going to play at the weekend, and there's been loads said about that.
Was there really? I must have missed that. Why is there no midweek game before the first test?
To be honest, I don't think that's a terrible thing, because it then gives them a week to sort themselves out. The thing I'm glad about.
They'll be like all their washing done. They'll be able to get their Ireland done, they're ready for the big day.
And they can have their picnics and their packed lunches all made for the big day out on the Saturday. But the thing I'm glad about is there's a midweek game between the first and second test.
Yeah.
Because it would be really easy now to just say, well, we'll play a few warm-up games, we'll play 3 test matches.
You go off tour, yeah.
Exactly. You need, and the players who are not in the 23 need to feel like, right, well, we've still got something to play for. So, yeah, I think I can see the logic in no game before the first test, but
the last game is on the 2nd August, and potentially 10 boys on that tour, maybe more, are now only going to play one game in the next month.
Australia's a nice place, plenty to see.
Aye,
lot of coffee. It's a long time. It's 3 weeks of
because they've still got to train. They've still got to train every day, and they'll be in the because you need to have a full squad to warm up against before a game. They haven't started on that one, but like they become so important, don't they? Because they have to keep the test team going. Yeah. You know, it's not about the you want to play rugby. You're there because you want to play. Anyway, off my high horse. I'm excited for this weekend more than probably I have been for any of the other games. I was quite excited for the Argentina game, but I was just too jealous that I wasn't there and everybody else was.
Yeah, I agree on all of that. Yeah, so let's see. We can discuss the first test team hopefully next week.
Yeah. Well, we've got a whole week to do it, so there's no midweek game to get in the way, and they'll be getting themselves sorted, and so will we be able to get ourselves sorted. Scotland 20s, I've had a couple of sore ones. Springboks, most recent, real tough. The depth of some of these nations is really quite frightening, and then when you see Italy under 20s, who the last 5 or 6 years have just grown in strength and depth, that's also, with the crystal ball out looking into the future, that's also a tough one to take. But Scotland have now got to play Ireland, who haven't really had the best of times either.
No, I mean, they took a sore one off New Zealand yesterday, but the Scotland one was tough. But I think the thing that will frustrate the players and frustrate Kenny Murray is it's like the senior team when they were on the back foot, and they were on the back foot a lot, but particularly early on, they did okay for sort of 2 or 3 minutes, got themselves in the game. Then, you've got to be realistic in those games that you're maybe not at that level. So let's not try the Harlem Globetrotters play, and they did. And Matty Irwin put a cross kick in for Ruben Logan. It didn't work. South Africa scored, and that sort of spiraled them, and they conceded 4 tries in the first 20 minutes. It's hard, at any level, it's so difficult when the game's totally gone away from you so quickly. But they just didn't essentially put the foot on it and say, stop. We need to stop the bleeding before we actually try and get ourselves back into it. I think after they obviously must have got a bit of roasting at half time, and immediately after the second half was better, but again, as you say, the difference in the depth. South Africa unloaded the bench and ran in 3 or 4 tries to make the score look even sorer. But look, there was bits in it that I thought, I keep talking about, I don't know how many times I can say Freddie Douglas, but Freddie Douglas won 3 or 4 turnover penalties in a game where Scotland were lucky to be second best. How good could he be if he was in the same environment as Henry Pollock or given the same opportunities? I just think, Jamie Stewart, I was pleased. There are a couple of sore ones, but there was a couple where they did okay. They held their own against the South African scrum. I don't think on an individual level their players were obviously much better, and Scotland struggled. But I think particularly the back division really struggled. But there's bits of that in years gone by, we would have said, Scotland were totally bullied up front, but they weren't. But they're just not at that level. They're not at the level of competing with New Zealand, South Africa, and it would stun me if that South Africa team doesn't go and win it. Ireland, as you say, I think is a different prospect. They obviously beat them Scotland beat them in Belfast in a warm-up game. And the Six Nations game for 60 minutes was close, but just so happened, again, Scotland only sort of got in the game after they conceded 2 or 3 early tries, and it felt like the game was gone. So Yeah, I think there was a bit of rotation in the team yesterday. That there's now no relegation. That feels like a bit of a crack that Kenny Murray's team can have a go at on Monday.
It's also like we don't need to win that. We need to win the Six Nations in the next 5 years. Like that's, and I hate to say it, but we've never really been able to compete to. It's years since we finished. Where did we finish? 5th or 6th or something in the under, or a wee bit higher?
Yeah, fifth. But I mean that was an exceptional team, and we've spoken about that before. Scott Cummings, Darcy, Hutch, Adam Hastings have all gone on, and there will be others that are missing, to have like really good careers.
And that's really the measure of a Scotland age group team. We've not got the number of players we've got eligible at under 20 compared to South Africa, compared to Italy. When I was a lad, Scotland under 16s used to play against Lancashire under 16s.
Yeah.
Because that was the equivalent, they had a similar number of schoolboy players in Lancashire to Scotland did. But then, no, you can't be playing them dates, not on internet. I can't remember why or when that happened, but the reality is the depth that for 1 or 2 years of ages is really shallow compared to others. So taking those pastings is kind of something we have to accept grudgingly, but we need to see the shoots of optimism, and I think there is with some of those players, and the potential that they've got to in 3 or 4 years' time be playing for Edinburgh, Glasgow, or another professional outfit. Hopefully, England. Like when I was a lad, that the England schoolboys team I was against, I think about 13 of them ended up playing for Scotland, for England, and about 8 of them won a World Cup. Yeah. 1 from our team played for Scotland. That South Africa team, quite a lot of them will already have professional contracts and be training professionally. I know we've now got more, but it's really difficult for them to get high level exposure.
And I think that's the one. We've got to work out a way of getting these guys into the system and playing games at a appropriate level that means they are developing quicker. And I don't necessarily think it's about flooding the pathway with numbers. I think the approach that David Nucifora wants to take is actually streamline the numbers and make sure we're giving the best players everything that we can give them. I think I'm not convinced. You're laughing. I'm not convinced that's that happens now. That's happening in Italy as we speak. I think there's a lot of work to be done on the pathway, and it's definitely a discussion that we could be here. We could be here till the morning talking about. But
yeah,
I think you're right. There are players that I'm more confident there are players in this team who will make a transition into a pro team somewhere in a shorter space of time than maybe it's taken the last couple of sort of years of under 20s.
Yeah. Agree with that, and I think it's. We'll see. I mean, Ireland. There's a chat. If they could beat Ireland and they go into a playoff for 9th, 10th, to not finish 11th or 12th would be a success. I think for that group. Having been on a tour in that environment, working together, hopefully it bodes well for Six Nations in future, and it's an exposure for those coaches as well. It should be a good thing.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to say is those pastings. Like I spoke to Rory Darge after Glasgow got pasted in Dublin, and he said quite honestly, like, this is worth nothing if we don't learn from it, that 52-0 game. And that's a wee bit the same from the 20s. Like, they can sort of write that game off, but there were moments, as I say, that sort of massive drop in performance when other teams just run riot. Well, that's still a kind of hangover from the Six Nations. So they've got to sort that out. And it's hopeless talking about. It's pointless, sorry, talking about the result if they don't fix bits of the performance.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty the age group teams have got, because they only exist for a finite time. And
yeah,
aye, no, I get it. Oh, mate, so much to talk about, so much to see. We've got a fair chunk of stuff coming up, and I don't know. You must be getting up early, are you? Setting the alarm for early on Saturday morning?
Alarm's already set, 3:30. Yeah, so it was a bit of a sore one on last Saturday there, because it kind of rolled into, alarm went at 4:00, and then when Scotland finished, I managed to catch the end of Wales, Japan, New Zealand, France, Lions, and then
England, Argentina, or South Africa. South
Africa, and then England, Argentina, with a wee nap in between. So it's looking like a very similar weekend this weekend, which I'm sure my wife's absolutely thrilled about.
That's why you get paid the rockstar wages, my man. That's why you're on the. That's why you're on the telephone number salary. That is absolutely it. Okay, good to chat to you. A quick word from our sponsor before we finish. The Scotland Rugby News podcast was brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV right now. There are thousands of jobs across Scotland, and you can find the one for you at S1 Jobs. So go and start your search right now, because we are done. Great to speak to you, big fella. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Look after yourselves, everyone.
I'll send you a message, Bruce, at 3:30 on Saturday morning.
I'll probably be up for swimming at that time.
Have a good one.
Cheers, bud.